You're listening to the Modern Healthcare Back Office, a podcast dedicated to solving the billing issues and gridlock facing the healthcare industry, presented by Prochant. Hosted by Chuck Ellis and Rachel Schools.
I am really excited today. Rachel and I are sitting down with our colleague and man-at-arms himself, Joey Graham, our Chief Revenue Officer here at Prochant. And Joey, you were just at the Great Lakes Home Medical Services Association conference in South Bend, Indiana. Tell me a little bit about your experience there and what you were picking up from the people you were talking to.
Sure. We travel all over the country all year attending the various state grassroots associations like the Great Lakes Association, which includes, I believe, Indiana and Michigan provide. And so, of course, they like to come together and work together on grassroots advocacy efforts, working with the state legislature and all, and for specifically things like Medicaid legislation, as well as health insurance contracts and rules within various states. So yeah, we were invited, and I was invited to come speak at the Great Lakes Association. We've been there before in the past, but this is, I believe, my first time speaking at the conference. And I can just walk you through the presentation. Does that sound good?
Sure. Yeah, I would love that. Let's get started here.
All right. Yeah. So this is a presentation we put together at the request of the providers, actually. They have an educational committee, and they wanted a presentation about workflow, how to get that, because that's a big topic right now is workflow. How do we do more with less? How do we make sure that our workflow is modern and meeting the needs of the business, but also not following archaic policies and the things that just because we've always done it that way doesn't mean we need to continue to do it that way. So they want to learn about how other providers are managing workflow and what are some ideas and things that they should really be considering. So
Makes sense that they would ask about that, Joey, because everybody's having to do more with less.
that's
So,
right. We're in an environment
perfect.
right now with record resignations and attrition, record increases in labor costs across the U.S., facing a $15 minimum wage, for example, and all these things coming together, really forcing providers to reevaluate the whole system, the whole workflow, and why do we need all these people? What are they all working on? And is there any opportunity for us to leverage technology and leverage better workflow management to reduce that headcount?
It's exciting times too with technology,
It is.
and everybody's willing to optimize.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some of that as we go through this. Just a little bit about me before we jump in. The Chief Revenue Officer here at Prochant, but I very much consider myself a child of the HME industry. And I started right out of high school at a local provider in Florida where I grew up, and worked my way up from literally the bottom of the org chart. I was a warehouse technician, scrubbing the equipment, filling the oxygen tanks, things like that, before becoming a driver, taking that 24-hour on call, working with patients overnight, traveling out into the middle of nowhere in my company van. I was a customer service rep. I was a biller and collector, and then I was the general manager for a regional DME provider, all before I got picked up by Brightree, and they made me a senior consultant, which is where I met you, Rachel. Traveled the country as a Brightree senior consultant, and that really used to know one provider's world, and now I understood a lot of different providers' worlds, everything from multi-billion-dollar corporations to single store, based HMEs, right, that do less than $1 million a year. So just the whole gamut of what those kind of providers are, what are their similar challenges, and then what are the different challenges, especially as you scale up your provider. How do you scale up your workflow and your technology to match? So yeah, I'm a DME guy, basically. Came right out of school, did that, and that's how I ended up here working with Prochant. So today we're going to be talking about the overall workflow, just to get on the same page with what it is, what does it mean. Then we're going to talk about traditional workflow management and what are the resulting problems of that. And then we're going to start to talk about technology and modern workflow management. What are some of the most important things that providers should be really thinking about as they look at modernizing their HME workflow. And then finally, we're going to end up by talking about some of the differences between front office and back office workflow management. So first off, just to get on the same page, when we say the revenue cycle and when we say workflow, what are we talking about? And so this is what we're talking about. We're talking about this circle here. It starts in the top with an incoming referral, and then it works its way through the circle there. So You see the front office, that's everything that's done before we provide our product or service to our patient. So that's all the intake, registration, eligibility, prior authorization, documentation, review, all that stuff is part of the front office. And then you fill your order, of course, and then you move to the back office, which is all the post things where now we've got to get a claim out the door. Now we've got to post the cash that comes in or work the denials that result from that claim. And so when we talk about workflow management, we're talking about how are you managing the flow of information through this circle, essentially making sure that every one of the referrals that comes in is tracked in some way and that every order you fill gets billed and collected. So there certainly is a lot that we could talk about. Hopefully this is resonating with all the providers as they see this circular chart in that workflow. So traditional workflow management, this is what I grew up around and what I remember from my early days in the industry. Everything was paper-based. It was all paper. So just piles of it everywhere. You had big industrial type fax machines just rolling through the referrals.
But an anxiety attack thinking
Exactly.
about it.
And I always think about the clipboard next to the fax machine where you would have to log new referrals. Otherwise, nobody knew what new referrals had come in. And the sales reps would come check the clipboard throughout the day. And at the end of the day, you'd maybe take a picture of it or make a copy of it and mail it to people so they can see what the referrals were.
What a
Leveraging,
mess.
like accordion files. Remember those where you had organized by alpha or organized by day of the month. And so like you would manage your resupply through one of these accordion files and drop a patient's file in on whatever day of the week or whatever day of the month they're supposed to be called. In boxes. Just think about all the boxes on people's desks and all the paper in those boxes. And you had your inbox and your in process and your problem charts and your outbox.
Some people still do this.
Oh, I know. This is very real. Charting, where that was my introduction to revenue cycle, really was charting. And the delivery tickets go on the right and the clinical documentation goes on the left, along with the order.
And don't you get it wrong.
Yeah. And then you got to put the stickers on it and you got to update the year every year. Then it goes in these giant walls of files so you can go find the patient's chart when you need it. And finally, I love the dot matrix 9-pen printers where they would just roll that paper out constantly and you'd print out the AR once a month in a great big pile and then tear it and give it to different people and they would work.
Highlighted. I would get it
Yeah,
highlighted with my work, Joey.
exactly. You highlight it, you put your notes, you cross them off or check them off as you work the accounts. So very much paper-based systems. And you also very much had like the division of responsibilities was basically you had CSRs or customer service reps or whatever you call them in your company. And these were the people who were managing the front office, which is all the before the delivery, before we provide our product or service stuff. Typically, those were organized by branch. Every branch would have their own, and they would manage all the patients in their region. And then in the back office, you would have your billers and your billers just handled everything in the back office. And they were typically split by payer. Typically for a larger provider, there would be a central billing office. But each of the branches would have its own CSRs. So that's like traditional how this industry, when all of a sudden it was in the 80s or something or the 70s when the respiratory therapists and the oxygen wholesalers decided that it was time to actually forge an industry out of these random orders they were getting for oxygen setups and things like that. And before that, there really wasn't an HME industry.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear. The biller, and I do remember this, Joey, we called them reimbursement specialists, and they were basically the steward of the claim once customer service was done.
Yeah, there's a lot of different names for that. ER people, whatever you want to call them. Every company would typically have their own name for that role, but it wasn't as organized as it is today when you look at the breakup by process and specializing people to be great at one or two areas of that back office.
Yep.
So some problems with the traditional approach are obviously it's highly manual and tedious. And of course, as a result, it's highly prone to human error. So the types of errors you're going to see are data entry errors, crisscrossing, spelling names wrong, improper capitalization, all that fun stuff. You save the last name, but you put a space after it before you hit save, and now nobody can find it. And then you've got errors in qualifying patients, right? Because we expect this entry-level position to know how to qualify for every single payer and every single product that we do. which is not a reasonable expectation. And so there's errors in qualifications, there's errors in documentation that's coming through. Do we get a prior auth or not? That's what that PA is, to get a PA or not. That was a big question. And still to this day, if you were to look at the top 5 denial reasons for this industry, prior authorization is on that list, probably number 2 or number 3. We still struggle with prior authorizations, but it's even better now than it was in the past. So do we get a prior auth or not? And of course, that knowledge of the payer and product specific billing rules just wasn't consistent. Of course, stuff happens. People get sick. People get sidetracked. A lot of these people doing customer service, their phone is ringing off the hook all day long, and they've got people walking up to them in the store asking them questions. At the same time, they're trying to process these insurance referrals. It's a lot. It's a whole lot. And the bottom line is, if the paper gets lost, the order gets dropped, right? Kind of like bottom line, that's the problem. If the paper gets lost, the order gets dropped. And we can't allow that because the order gets dropped. We have unhappy referrals. We have unhappy patients. So let's talk about modern HME workflow. What's the difference from what we just discussed? The first thing, the big thing, is no more paper at all. No more paper. We don't need paper. If somebody wants to print something, ask them why. What is it they're trying to print?
Screaming hallelujah.
We don't need all the paper. Now, there are still people like me who need a notebook and they need a little paper to-do list, and that's fine. Our kids do not need that, by the way, but we do, and that's okay. But what we don't need to be doing is printing out all this stuff and printing out all these reports and printing out faxes. For sure, we don't need to be printing out faxes. If you need to print something, instead save it to a PDF and then upload it to your document workflow system. That's what you need to do. So no more paper.
Bees on paper as well. Figure out how to fix it.
That's right. You want claims to go out the door. You won't ever get 100% appeals and things. Like, there will be some paper. I'm not saying there won't be any at all, but there won't be much. There shouldn't be much. I've seen this. I've been to providers who do not have a printer. And when you walk around, like, there's a printer, but it's not out there. It's not like in the normal office where you've got the great big printer and everybody prints to it all day long. And you've got your little code, you go up to the printer and it prints out all your stuff for you. No, there's none of that because you don't need it. There's a little notepad if you want to take a note while you're on the phone. But otherwise, everything lives in the computer and everything is digital. And the paper has to live in the document workflow system. So our fax machine's been replaced by eFax. And actually, eFax is being replaced by EReferral. We're going to talk a lot more about EReferral. Accordion files have been replaced by intelligent work queues. Using our workflow system, we can have the work served up on the day it needs to be worked by the system. We don't need to use accordion files. Our inboxes and our charting, that's been replaced by the EMR, the electronic medical record. And of course, our dot matrix printers, all that has been replaced by on-demand as well as scheduled reports. For most modern billing systems, you can go run whatever report you want, whenever you want. You can also schedule reports to be emailed to you, to be run automatically. And those are actively being replaced by business intelligence systems, where you can literally create dashboards. You can create whatever you want. It gets refreshed either real time or once a day. There's no need to be printing out the AR, for instance. Nobody ever needs to print the AR. Your teams are centralized for both front office and back office, and they're structured by process, payer, and product. So whatever makes sense for your company, you create little specialist teams that focus on, let's say that you're very heavy Medicaid, for instance. Maybe you do a lot of Medicaid incontinence. So you have a Medicaid incontinence group, and then you have a separate group that manages the other referrals. But so you can figure out what makes sense.
It's like Sigma, but for service.
It is. It is. And the elevated version, we're going to talk more about it, is decision support systems, what I mean is, I said earlier, we expect our people to be experts in every single payer and product, and that's not a reasonable expectation. What we have to do is make the job easier. Bottom line, we have to make the job easier so that we can bring in people faster, we can train them faster, and they have things that they can go to learn and to get better. And decision support, we're going to talk more about it, is really where this industry is headed. So we need decision support systems to guide our employees through the process. We need to allow our patients to self-service via patient portal. And we're going to talk more about that. That's an emerging area for HME, but it's an area that we're a little behind on, and it's
It's
something
long
we really got to
overdue. We're
focus.
way behind.
Way
Yeah.
behind. We are, but we got to pick up speed there. I was actually just at a conference where Ernst and Young did a keynote, and one of the things they said is you are competing with the last best experience that your customer had, like it or not. And what that means is almost every business now is competing with Amazon and Amazon's
And we
customer
want an easy
experience.
button.
That's right. And in Amazon, it's so easy to buy something. There's a buy now button, one click, you're done. If you want to return something, it's 2 or 3 clicks. It's easy to return. It's not a big process. The system is so much easier. And so we have to be advancing because we're just a pain in the butt to work with in terms of what the patient feels.
And we've got to keep up with Amazon.
That's right. And finally, you have to automate repetitive tasks. You have to set up the workflow so that people work by exception. That's the key, right? Your people should not have to touch every work item at all. They should be working by exception, and you should have a system in place that's taking care of the majority of the work in an automated fashion. So that's when we talk about modern HME workflow. These are the things that we need to be focused on building within our company. So let's talk a little bit about e-referrals. E-referrals are an emerging frontier inside of the industry right now, and it's super important. For years, there's a different drum we were beating, and it was collect patient credit cards up front. Everybody will probably remember for years and years, the industry was beating this drum. You have to take payment up front from your patients, and you have to capture their credit card. And for years, it was so hard for providers to adopt that. But right now, the majority of providers are there. They're finally doing it. They're collecting the credit cards up front. They're billing the patients up front. This is the next drum. And we're going to be beating this drum for a few years now. But e-referrals are the future of referrals. And you have to get in front of this trend right now. What is an e-referral? An e-referral is when you're getting the physician's order, prescription, CMN, whatever you call it, plus you're getting the medical necessity documentation up front, right there as part of the order. And typically, and hopefully, this gets integrated into your billing system so that when a referral comes in, it comes into the billing system for you and maybe even creates the patient record for you.
It could be kind of like a pharmacy.
Yeah, exactly. So there are some major players in the e-referral world right now. DME Scripts was just invested in heavily by VGM, Adapt Health, Lincare, and Apria, I believe. Which one do you think is going to take off? Just DME Scripts is definitely something everybody needs to be taking note of. Parachute Health had some really early success that was really great. They have a really nice system and a lot of providers leverage them today. Stratus is the OGs. They've been doing this for years and years now. They have a solid platform and a lot of providers like their platform. And finally, ePrescribe by Braintree is a new product and it's integrated with several platforms, including GoScripts, which is the platform that ResMed owns. And that's another avenue for getting these referrals in. And finally, the major hospital EMRs have a feature called Direct Secure Messaging or DSM. And they have the ability to create these e-referrals and send them into other systems. Epic and Cerner have this in place. The other major ones do as well. So you can actually work with your hospital referrals on a process where they can do the DME referral in Epic. And at the end of it, it creates a direct secure message with the e-referral. So that's what e-referral is. And this is an emerging market. This is what all providers need to have their eyes on it and be exploring it and trying to figure out how it's going to work in their business.
I see it working when one emerges, right? Think about all of the communication back and forth and interoperability and all of that stuff. So it's going to be interesting to see which one kind of bubbles up.
It's still an uphill battle and still the majority of referrals are coming in through faxes. But that will change. Mark my words, that will change. And now's the time to get in front of that trend. Otherwise, you're not going to be getting the e-referrals because you need to make sure you're on the list.
It's getting attention, which means that people are talking, which means this is going to happen.
It is.
So, Joey, you might be about to get to this, but what can folks in the DME and HME industries do to get in front of this if they do realize they are behind it and that this is basically a ticking clock that is just about to go off here? So, what can they do to fix this and get ahead of things?
That's why I listed out the major players there. You got to talk to them, right? Start those
Go
conversations
check it out.
now. The thing is, many of these platforms require the physician to go into a separate web portal. And that is often the number one barrier to entry to getting one of these off the ground. Is the last thing a physician's office needs is another web portal, another username and login. However, for instance, Parachute integrates with many of the physician EMRs. Brightree ePrescribe integrates with Epic. So I think having the conversations with these providers, I think that you also have to accept that you're probably going to have to play with all of them. That would be my advice. I would get accounts with every one of these, and I would figure out who's in where, and then try to make inroads with maybe your preferred one or two platforms for those where you don't have that access.
From a procedural standpoint, I agree. I would put together some sort of a survey and get with top referrals and collect what you need to know from them, which is what systems are they using? Because you obviously want to make a choice that's informed and you want to work with whatever your providers and your referrals are working with.
That's right. And then one of the most important keys to success will be if you're able to find a platform that will integrate with their EMR so that they don't have to go into a separate web portal. That's where you'll find the most success. So the next thing I want to talk about is decision support. And I'll open up by asking, look at the little paperclip guy. Do you guys remember him? Do you guys remember?
I do, and he's gotten so much smarter.
So when I think about this ages me, when I think about decision support, I think about Clip. So here's what it was. Back when Microsoft Word first came out, like this is the early 2000s, I think, maybe even the late 90s. I think it was the late 90s. And you would open up Word and you would start to type a letter, and the Word would be like, hey,
I'll
it looks
help
like
ya.
you're writing a letter. Would you like some help? Wow,
And it
yes.
was actually helpful.
I know. Yes, I would like some help. And then you would say, yes, give me some help. And it would open up a wizard and it would walk you through it. All right. Who are you writing the letter to? What's their address? What's your body tags? Who are you? Finish. Boom. It creates the letter for you. Right. So imagine you had a system where you start to process, let's say, a CPAP order for a Medicare patient. And all of a sudden the system goes, hey, it looks like you're processing a Medicare CPAP order. Would you like some help? And so now you can have a system that will actually help the rep do the order. So here's what you need. This is Medicare, so they're going to need this and this. Do you have it? Right? So it just walks them. And so that's where we're headed. All the major big providers are headed in a direction where you have to have a decision support system to help your people do this stuff and do it better.
And this also helps with onboarding, right? It makes hiring and onboarding like
Oh,
super
yeah,
simple. Training. Like
exactly.
this is training. You get on the job training.
And there's a hierarchy to the development of a decision support system, right? It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a while to build up. What it generally starts as is first off, there has to be a knowledge base. That's the bottom, like that's the foundation of a decision support system is a knowledge base. And a knowledge base could be a number of things. For most providers, it's a series of Word files and Excel files in Windows file server. So we have folders in Windows, we have Word files and Excel files in those folders. Maybe that lives in SharePoint or maybe not. Maybe it just lives on a server somewhere. And you can just search and find hopefully the relevant file and open that up and have a look and see what you're supposed to do. That's
So
where
I
it all
just ask a
starts.
question and it pulls the things back that it thinks are relevant.
Yeah, but yeah, that's more like keyword searches, right? In this example, I'm going to search Medicare CPAP and see what comes up. And hopefully I'll find a good work aid or something that I'll be able to use to help me get through this Medicare CPAP order. And then as it advances, then it turns into more like a wiki. Everybody's familiar with Wikipedia. One of the nice things about wikis is that they can be crowd authored. In other words, you're not limited to one or two people who are building this thing out. You can have the people who are using it help build it to different levels. So building out like a wiki, which would almost be like taking all these Word Excel files and putting them in a website so that they're able to be searched more quickly. They live as articles instead of as Word and Excel files and PDF files. And then you move into like formal knowledge-based systems, which do exist. And if you search Google, you'll find knowledge-based systems that you can explore, and they have various costs. They essentially create, at the end of the day, the wiki that I described, the website. You can also purchase, and we've seen providers who use decision trees. So decision tree software will walk people through a series of questions and then point them to either the right article or to the answer that they need. So you could have a decision tree software come up and walk someone through, okay, I have a new order. It's a Medicare order. The product line is CPAP. And then it says, okay, you need this and this. So that would be the decision tree. And finally, you get to guided tours and wizards, which is where we're headed, where there's software that, like, we've all been there, like with a new app. First time you start a new app, and it walks you through all the features of the app and says, hey, look over here, and then look over here, and click here, and then do this. So it'll literally walk you through how you do it. So you could imagine you could actually start a guided tour, and it says, okay, fill out the patient demographics and hit save. Then go here, click on this screen. Now click right here, enter this information. So you can literally create that and publish that for your team. And one last thing I would mention is, one of the keys to success nowadays, especially with the younger generation, is short videos, short how-to videos. And when I say short, I'm not talking about Vine. If anybody remembers Vine, it was a social network that had 7-second videos. But I am talking about
A few minutes.
I'm talking about TikTok. So I'm talking about short videos, 1, 2, no more than 3 minutes, to the point. Boom, this is how you do this. So creating these short how-to videos that can be indexed, sorted, tagged, indexed, and presented when relevant will be very critical and powerful in helping your team sort through this stuff and quickly make the right. So that's when I want to talk about decision support. The next thing I want to talk about is patient portal. Now, this is something that we mentioned earlier, we're very behind. So when we talk about healthcare as an industry, what's said is healthcare is about 10 years behind every other, and DME is about 10 years behind healthcare. So all you got to do is look at what was amazing 20 years ago, and that's what's going to shock and awe today in the DME world. And hopefully we're doing what we can to lessen that gap, but in some ways it's very much true. And this is one area where, now it's not 20 years behind, but it is at least 10 years behind where other industries are. Don't our patients have a portal? Why don't we have an app? That, like, what's going on here? So this is the 2020s. Patients want to self-service. Patients want an app. Patients want a website. They don't want to have to call you. They want to be able to see everything. They want to be able to do things themselves without talking to people. They also want order status. You remember the pizza tracker?
Oh, yeah.
And of course, I've got the picture up on the screen. Everybody remembers the pizza tracker. When this came out, it was revolutionary. Totally revolutionary. I remember my mind was blown when this came out. And I thought, no way. I can see exactly what's going on with my pizza. I can see who's delivering it and when they're going to get to my house. And nowadays, we can even track like when they're going to be here. How many stops are they until they're at my house? So we've got to get there. Our patients don't know anything, right? Like we're like the company, the cable guy. Well, I'll be there between 8 and 5. That doesn't help anybody. So we need a pizza tracker for DME.
Yeah, I even feel like patients should be able to register themselves in the doctor's office, and it might
Yeah,
could even say, "You need this. Go ahead and get it. Take a
exactly.
picture, upload it, whatever."
Exactly. Schedule it. You want to see the doctor? Put yourself on the schedule. The little screenshot I have in the top right there, that's actually from Athena Health. And Athena Health is one of the leading, I think it's the #1 physician EMR. It's a big, large company, and they have a lot of cool things. And one of the things they have is patient portal. So this is just to help providers see this is what's possible. This is what already exists in the physician space. So 24/7 access to your account. You've got a web portal, but you also have an app. That's so important. You've got an app in the App Store, in the Google and the Apple App Store. There is an app with your name on it. When you log into that, you're able to see your information. You're able to send messages to your care team. You're able to schedule appointments, schedule whatever you need. You're able to put in refill requests, and you're able to pay your bill and look at your statement of account and figure out what happened. Look at your EOBs. So we've got to get there. There has been some movement. For instance, we know Brightree's created a patient portal that does some of these, but this is an area where the HME industry as a whole is very much behind. And this is an area that we really need to be focused on getting better. So patient portal, there's two more points here. So automation is super important, right? I mentioned earlier, you need to create a system where people are able to work by exception. The team is working by exception. They're not working every single work. We've seen successful examples of automation throughout the healthcare revenue cycle, everywhere from data entry of brand new patients. Like we mentioned earlier, an EReferral can come in and actually populate the patient record, create a new order, index the document to that order. All that's possible. There's also technology like OCR that will read machine written text and reproduce that and do your typing for you, essentially. There's
Look for
bots,
keywords.
right? There's bots that you can feed data into and they can go do that typing and stuff for you. So a lot of opportunities there. Eligibility benefits verification. There are some automated services out there. Of course, there is eligibility that you can just click a button and it runs. But there's also even services that can go out and go to insurance websites and run an eligibility and populate the information you need. That's all using technology called robotic process automation. And the same thing with prior authorizations. In fact, we've met with companies that have automated prior authorization in place where you have a system that's able to go out there and request authorizations either through web portals, through faxes, whatever the appropriate means of communication is based on the payer and the product, it can submit for you. And it can even give you back, like when it comes across exceptions or when it gets asked questions that it doesn't know the answer to, it can have the user enter that information and then it continues, the automation continues. So again, your team is working by exception and not having to work every single authorization. Imagine with software like that, a prior auth rep could submit half a dozen auths at once and then be there to manage the exceptions as they happen instead of one at a time. Order confirmation. So all the major players have automated order confirmation in place nowadays, where when they have confirmation of delivery, they confirm that order and they go ahead and manage it through the hold if it needs to be, or they let the claim drop if that's appropriate. Cash posting. Now, auto posting's been out for a long time, but we've even developed automation for auto posting because with auto posting, a bunch of exceptions get generated. You can actually leverage automation to manage the exceptions and get the majority of the auto posted cash batches final posted without human intervention. Denial resolution. You should be able we're going to talk about workflow in a second or work queuing, but you should have certain work queues that have automated resolution. One example I've heard of is a provider they get a lot of denials asking for the purchase invoice, for example, and they actually have to send them the purchase invoice with an appeal. So they have automated that where they've got a file with all the purchase invoices for all the products. And when one of these denials comes in, it creates a little cover letter, it attaches the Bright purchase invoice, and it fires off an appeal. So nobody had to touch that. Nobody had to work that. And finally, resupply. We've seen some nice automation resupply. And a recent example is SnapWorks, who's really made a real splash in the industry with some truly useful automation. We heard some really great results there. Now, of course, there are still exceptions, but you can have the majority of that work being done in an automated fashion. So there is a lot of opportunity for automation. It just takes a lot of work to get it right and to get it to the point where it can really manage the majority of the work. Intelligent work queues. So intelligent work queues is super important. Remember, this is replacing our files. So this is serving up the work to the right person at the right time, sending the right work to the right team member. So within each process, you're able to define, for example, level 1 through level 3 competency, for example, so that I can have the easy work funneled to the level 1 person and I can have the complex work funneled to the level 3 person. So for instance, maybe modifier denials would go to a level 1 person, but a medical necessity denial might go to the level 3 person. The work queues are typically built on rule sets. So the rule sets underlie the work queues and they tell the system where to send the work to. And I actually included a couple of screenshots from our own system. So we have an AR intelligent work queuing system. And this is just an example of how that setup works, where this is going to be a level 3 queue so this is a complex work queue. And in this example, you can see that these certain denial codes, 112, 193, 55, and B1 for the payers and indicated, those are going to go drop into this level 3 queue automatically. So nobody else has to touch it first. It goes straight to this level 3 queue. Similarly, you could do something like that with this inquiry status. That's that next tab over, where if it denied for a CMN or for medical records or for medical necessity, then that's going to go to that level 3. So that just gives you an example of kind of some of the systems you can build out to create the rule sets you need to be able to funnel the work to the right person. The last kind of area I want to talk about before we end the call is front office versus back office. I bring this up because one of the things we've really found is that there is not a single unifying workflow unless you build it yourself. One system to govern them all, not likely unless you develop it. So for example, most providers we know of use Braintree or another system like that, and they're leveraging what's called WIP states or work in progress states to manage their front office, manage their orders. But then on the back end, they're leveraging a whole different system to manage the revenue cycle workflow and all the. So in this example, you have two distinct workflow systems that you're managing: the whipping of the front office, and then the RCM work list on the back end. We're going to talk more about like a common WIP setup for front office, because I know that's really important for providers, and this definitely can be insightful as well in terms of comparing your own work in progress setup to what we recommend. But on the back end, some things you have to make sure of. This is just a hit list of when I'm evaluating my back end, my RCM workflow, what are the things I'm making sure that I'm managing? So first, of course, your confirmation, that might be managed through WIP states. For most providers, it is. Your unbilled and your held and your stop hold, making sure you have a workflow system for that. Rejections. And of course, we've built our own workflow system to help us with rejections. Sometimes that lives in a whole different area, right? If you think about Braintree, there's a whole different area you go to manage your rejections. Your open deposits, that's another really important workflow. That's for your cash posting. Your billed claims or your AR, right? So you got what we've seen with some providers is they're going with green, yellow, red, a way of statusing claims so that the higher priority claims get marked red and they get worked first. So this is an example of how something like that could work based on how old it is, based on the aging date. But there are other aspects that you can throw in there as well to how things are going to turn yellow, green, and red. Your denials, your new denials that are coming in the door, those need to be managed, and as well as your follow-ups, which are your claims you previously worked. My point is, especially looking at that back office there, unless you've developed your own workflow system, you probably are going to have multiple workflow systems. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just you have to make sure that you've captured that and that you have really thought through the workflow in each one of those systems. Okay. And when it comes to front office and common WIP states, and again, WIP is a work in progress. When you talk about a WIP state, it has three data elements. It's the WIP state itself, the owner who's responsible for it, and the follow-up date. And of course, that will cause it in the intelligent workflow system to show up in the right person's inbox when they need to work it. But when you're looking at those WIP states, what would be a common setup? So this is a simple setup, but this would show you where you don't want to get much more complex with this. You definitely don't want 50, 60 WIP states. That's far too many WIP states. It's too much to manage. So what we like to look at is, as you can see in this workflow, they're numbered. That's important. You want to make sure that you number your WIP states so that when they show up in the list, they show up in a logical order. And otherwise, they're going to get alphabetized and they're going to be all over the place. So you want them to show up in the logical flow, in the logical order. So in this one, it goes to new intake, then it goes to benefits verification, then it goes to prior auth, then it goes to scheduling, then it goes out for fulfillment. And then you'll notice that there are interim WIP states for issues. So if there's an issue or we're missing something, then we can park it in one of these parking lots. And that way everybody knows this is what's going on. But notice we didn't create a parking lot for every potential issue. And that's where I think some providers get lost, is they will create a parking lot for literally every possible issue. And now you've got 50, 60, 70 WIP states. And it's just a huge list to scroll through. It's inaccurate. It's really difficult to manage. So instead, you park it in a WIP state like missing information, and then you leverage like the note field or another field to put in like what's wrong.
custom field.
Yeah,
Yep.
or a custom field. Exactly. So you can put in what's wrong there, but you're keeping your whips clean.
The other nice thing about having it ordered like this, Joey, and in not necessarily chronological, but chronological order, when you visualize this, it allows you to see like where you're having issues in your sort of intake cycle very quickly.
That's right. That's right. You have areas where things are building up. You don't have enough capacity in that area. Like in prior auths, do you notice orders get stuck? That would help you see, okay, I need to tweak my staffing strategy so that I have more people working on prior auths. So yeah, that's my presentation, guys. Hopefully it's helpful. I appreciate you guys listening.
Oh, that was fantastic. Thank you, Joey. I appreciate you taking the time to break that down for us. That is a lot. I think anyone in HME and DME is going to agree that this is probably the most chaotic time to be in this industry and that there are a lot of changes ahead. And again, if anyone has any questions, they can reach out to Joey directly at 980-999-4293 or email him at joeyg@prochant.com. And again, thank you so much, Joey, for joining us. On behalf of myself and Rachel, thank you everyone for listening and watching. I am very excited for what we've got coming up next, so be sure to subscribe and follow us for more great stuff coming up real soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Modern Healthcare Back Office, a presentation of Prochant, a wholly owned revenue cycle management service dedicated to serving HME, pharmacy, infusion, and other healthcare providers. Learn more about us at prochant.com.